Guys, in this next part of chapter 22, we're going to be discussing many of the environmental issues that are currently impacting our planet. Some of them are very big issues that get talked about every day. Some of them you might not be as familiar with. So that's the goal of this section, is to go through some of those big environmental issues. It's not going to cover everything. There are a ton of issues affecting our environment right now, but we're going to go through some of the big ones, some of the maybe most important ones that are happening right now, and talk about how they're actually affecting all of the organisms in our environment as well. So first up on this slide, we're all going to be familiar with this one, pollution, talking about substances that cause unintended harm to the air, water, or soil. Pollution can take many forms. It could be pieces of like physical trash. It could be different chemicals and things that are dumped into water. It could be different types of gases and things that are burned and put up into the air. Um, in this picture on the slide, it gives us an example of a collection of pollution called smog. And this is actually happens when water vapor in the air gets mixed with chemicals that result from human activities. One of the biggest activities, obviously, is going to be the driving of cars. In our area, it's not too crowded, but on a busy day up in Pittsburgh, if you've ever been, there on a busy day, you might be waiting in traffic a half hour, 40 minutes to get into the city sometimes. Pictures like this one down below, maybe not as smoggy because cars are a little bit cleaner now, but certainly there are still so many cars, especially in our big cities, that put a lot of this pollution up into the air. Some factories and things like that as well put these chemicals up into the air. I think it's important to note that our cars are a lot cleaner than they used to be. So, for example, Pittsburgh looks a lot cleaner than it used to. Back in the 80s, pictures like this slide here would be very common to see almost every day, especially in the summertime. But nowadays, cars are a lot cleaner. There's still a good bit of pollution going up in the air, but you can't see it as easily. It's not as heavy. So that's one improvement, but it's still a big issue that we have here on Earth. This is a picture that shows some more of the sad effects of pollution in our environment, some of the sad things that happen. This organism here looks like it might have been a type of bird that lived maybe near the ocean or like a riverbank. It looks like it's a sandy area. But if you look closely, you can see all these brightly colored pieces of plastic inside of this bird that is decomposing. So likely what we see happen with a lot of birds nowadays is they'll see these little pieces of plastic from things that we throw away, things that we break, and they look appetizing to birds because they have a bright color. They might look like berries or fruit that they eat, and they'll come down, and birds don't really chew. They just kind of swallow whatever they're going to eat whole. They just gobble it up. So a lot of times what happens is that can cause damage to their organs and kill the bird. Sometimes birds have become so filled with plastic that there's no more room in their stomach to actually swallow any other type of food, and that plastic doesn't really break down, so they actually starve to death. They ate so much plastic that they starve to death because they can't eat any other food. This is something that is common. We're finding in places where there are lots of birds and lots of humans. A lot of our trash gets swallowed up by them. So it's not just birds that go through this. Fish and turtles, some reptiles, they have this problem too. But I just wanted to show you guys that it's pretty sad to see. Um, you know, this is something that we have an impact on and we can change. Another environmental issue that comes back and forth to us is the ozone thinning. I say it goes back and forth because we have done some things in the past couple decades to make this problem not totally go away, but we've made this problem a lot better. We've come up with some solutions for it, but it is something we still need to be concerned about because in the future our ozone might start to thin out again. Uh, there are some causes that happen. There are some things that we've done that have affected this. There are several kinds of human-made chemicals that contribute to the destruction of the ozone layer. The biggest type of chemical that does this is called a chlorofluorocarbon, more commonly a CFC. This was a once widely used type of chemical that you would find in coolants, such as refrigerators and air conditioners. This chemical, it's still used a little bit today, but not as much. It acts as a catalyst for reactions that break down the ozone layer. So what happened a long time ago, decades ago, is a lot of these CFCs, this gas, this chemical, was being released into the atmosphere, and it actually reacts with that protective ozone layer, and it actually kind of eats away at it. It destroys it. So there was a time in this graphic that you can see here that we actually had a pretty sizable hole in the ozone layer. It had thinned out, and in that hole in the ozone layer, the sun's radiation was coming through a lot more strongly. It would be dangerous if a lot of humans were to live in that area. Thankfully, it was around one of the poles, either the North or the South Pole, so not a lot of people lived there, but other areas of the ozone became thinner too, and it's still not quite where we want it to be. So the reason why CFCs are so dangerous is just one of those CFC molecules can destroy up to 100,000 ozone molecules. So in our picture here, we have a CFC molecule escaping from a spray can. They're often used in types of spray cans. That chemical goes up in the atmosphere and it causes a cycle reaction where it reacts with one ozone molecule and then the next ozone molecule reacts up into 100,000 ozone molecules can be changed and destroyed, turned into something else, regular oxygen, which doesn't help protect us from the sun. We need that ozone layer. Without it, a lot more radiation comes down from the sun. Plants would be damaged. Our skin would be damaged much more. We likely would not be able to be outside very long. So it's really, really important. Thankfully, we put some laws in place back in the 1980s to really cut down on the amount of CFCs that we use. So the ozone layer has actually been able to repair itself in recent decades because of laws that the world kind of agreed upon. The world came together and said, "Hey, this is a huge issue that's affecting, all of us. It's a danger to every country on Earth. So we need to work together in order to ban this molecule, or at least cut down the use of it." And that's what we did. And it's a great example of an environmental law working and showing how we can actually improve our environment and make it more safe for everybody. Another big issue, probably the biggest issue going on today, is global warming, also called climate change. Sometimes we use different names for it because the entire climate of the Earth is changing. Some places are going to be getting warmer, some places might be getting colder than normal, but overall the climate is changing. And overall, the actual average temperature of the planet is going up. We talked about the greenhouse effect in our last section. We talked about how those greenhouse gases help trap heat on Earth. And we said that humans have impacted that greenhouse effect. They've increased it because we put all of this carbon dioxide, CO2, up into the atmosphere. So CO2 is a very, very strong greenhouse gas, and it traps a lot of heat. So we put more and more of this gas into the atmosphere by things that we do. We drive cars. Everything we make goes back to using some type of fossil fuel, usually like oil or gasoline or coal. Um, so we put a whole bunch of this greenhouse gas up in the atmosphere, more than what is supposed to be there. And this has led to more heat being trapped on Earth than is supposed to. And this is changing our climate. This is changing ecosystems. Animals can't adapt quickly enough to this change. So we're seeing species start to go extinct. Now, scientists have noticed a relationship between the average levels of CO2 in the atmosphere and the average global temperatures. We'll have a chart that shows that. But in general, as the CO2 levels have increased, as we put more and more into the atmosphere, so has the average temperature of the Earth. And one of the big things that we think about right away, and we see pictures of here, is those places that are most fragile, like in the Arctic. The Arctic is melting very, very quickly, and we're losing a lot of ice, a lot of area for polar bears to hunt on, a lot of area for penguins to use to breed. So those organisms are the first ones that are being affected by this crisis. We're seeing them be less healthy. We're seeing their numbers drop. Less of their young are surviving because they're losing their environment. Polar bears can't swim forever. They need to be on land for most of their life. So that is something that we're seeing right away. But this is a problem that is happening everywhere, not just up in the Arctic. It's happening everywhere. It's just happening maybe more slowly in a lot of places than in the Arctic because the Arctic is so fragile. We have ice up there. But in our area, for example, we're seeing a lot more rainfall than normal because the climate is changing. It's changing our weather patterns. We're getting a lot more rain than we have in recent years. So we might have more flooding events in our area. With the melting of this ice that you see in these pictures, ocean levels are rising. And if you think about where most of our big cities are, they're on the coastlines. They're on the East Coast and the West Coast. And down on the South Coast in Texas, those areas are in danger of increased flooding. They're already seeing increased flooding during high tide in some areas. The ocean's coming in further than it ever has. They're actually having to raise roads up in Florida because they're becoming flooded during the day when it's not even raining. It's just the ocean is rising and the high tide is bringing those waves and that ocean water into places where it hasn't been before. This is a problem that will be getting worse and worse, and we're going to have to think about, those millions of people that live in these big cities. If their place becomes flooded, more often, a lot of them are going to be thinking about moving and migrating somewhere because where they live is no longer a habitable place. So here's a chart that we have as evidence for the increase of the temperature along with the increase of carbon dioxide. So in the red, it shows us how carbon dioxide levels have increased in our atmosphere since the 1880s. In the 1880s, 1890s, that's when the Industrial Revolution really started. We started getting a lot of factories. We started burning a lot of coal. And then through the 1900s, we're using not only a lot of coal, but now a lot of oil. And today we're using a lot of natural gas. We still use a lot of those things. We're getting more renewable energy resources like solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric power that uses water, but we still use a lot of things that create carbon dioxide. So we can see in that red line there, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased over the past century, and it's increased a lot. It's increasing. You can see that curve goes really on a steep incline towards the later half of the 1900s. So we've been putting a lot in there. In the blue, that blue line, that dark blue line, that's kind of a wave. That is the average global temperature for each year that's plotted on here. And we can see that it does change from year to year. It goes up and down, up and down. But the overall trend is the average temperature of the Earth is increasing. Especially look at like 1980 to now. That average global temperature has really started to increase right along with carbon dioxide levels. And that's what we would expect. Anytime we increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you would expect more heat to be trapped and the average temperature of the Earth to go up. That's what we're seeing. So that's the evidence that we have for this. So global warming and climate change, that's something that it's going to be an issue that you will hear about your entire lives. It's going to be something that's going to be here with us. It's going to be affecting us in ways that we can't really even think about yet. It's going to be affecting our farming because our climate's going to be changing. It's going to be affecting the spread of diseases because a lot of things are carried by parasites and insects, and those things live in very warm areas. However, those areas are getting larger and larger because the earth is warming up. So we're starting to see diseases spread into places where they haven't been before. Maybe things that are carried by like mosquitoes and ticks. We're seeing a lot more of those things being spread. You guys looked into all of this stuff with your State of the Climate report a few weeks ago, but it really is a big issue that we have going on right now, and hopefully we're able to do things in our lives as a human race in order to kind of change this and at least stop some of the really bad effects from happening. So scientists predict that temperatures may rise an additional 2 degrees Celsius, so about 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the next 100 years. That doesn't sound like a lot when you think about day-to-day temperature, but when you talk about the average temperature of the Earth, when you say that it might go up by 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the next 100 years, some places may go up by 4 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's an average. Some places might go up by 10, 12 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really bad in those areas that are really fragile. Like areas like our farmland, areas like the Arctic. So we really got to be concerned about this. That temperature change does impact just about everything about life on Earth. So these subtle small changes in temperature can lead to changes in rainfall patterns and sea levels around the world. We already talked about how our rainfall pattern is increasing. We're getting more and more of it in our area. In some areas, they're getting less and less. They're getting droughts where they never had droughts before, or at least the droughts are getting worse. So those are some concerns that we have. These changes could disrupt agriculture, our farming, and they could disrupt ecosystems around the world. So this is a huge issue that's going to take the whole world really working together. It's not going to help if America is the only country that tries to solve this issue and nobody else does. Every country on Earth is going to have to come together to participate in solving this huge crisis that we have. Another environmental issue that you might have heard about is acid precipitation, or you might have heard of acid rain. This occurs when air pollutants like sulfur, they combine with water in the atmosphere to form acids. So in our picture here, let's say we're burning a whole bunch of different chemicals from a factory, and it goes up into the atmosphere as a gas. It mixes with water, and it comes back down. There have been people over time that have had their cars damaged by really strong acid rain. It can kind of wear away at the paint on cars. If this acid rain falls into areas where you have plants or into a stream or into a pond, it can be very harmful. That acid rain can change the pH of the water and make it too acidic. It can start to kill some of the amphibians and some of the fish and insects in those areas. So that's something that we have to be concerned about too, acid precipitation. It's still a big issue today. When we look at how different chemicals harm our environment, we usually find something called biological magnification. This is the process in which chemicals become more concentrated in an organism that is higher up on a food chain. The top predators, they are likely to get a lot more pollutants in their diet than maybe the smaller organisms towards the bottom of the food chain. Here is a picture that shows us how biological magnification happens. Let's say that we have a pond that becomes contaminated with a pollutant called DDT. And this pollutant is in the water down towards the bottom of that chart, down towards the bottom of that pyramid where it just says water. And let's say that maybe some of the plankton and algae start to take in some of that pollutant into their cells. And then let's say some small fish eat those. You can see as we go up this food chain, those pollutants, they take up a smaller and smaller space as they go up that food pyramid. So in the small fish, they have more pollutants concentrated in them than the zooplankton did. Now, as we move up towards the larger fish and then the top predator in this picture, the bird, we can see that those pollutants become even more concentrated in those top predators. That can make those top predators much more sick, and that can be much more harmful to those top predators than maybe the smaller predators and the smaller organisms below. So that's something that we see happen a lot. Those pollutants get passed on through the food chain. The small fish, they're filled with pollutants, and then they pass those pollutants on to the larger fish, and then the larger fish passes those pollutants on to the bird. So those pollutants get passed on and they get more concentrated in those top predators. And then one of the last main issues that we want to talk about is ecosystem disruption. All of the impacts that we have on the air, the water, and the land, they all are happening at the same time. So all of these issues we've been talking about, the acid rain, the climate change, the ozone thinning, pollution, all of these are happening at the same time. So this is having a really big impact on our ecosystems. These are contributing to ecosystem disruption. It's disrupting the natural way things are supposed to be in our ecosystems. This is leading to an extinction of many different species on Earth. We are actually in the beginning of a mass extinction. We are seeing organisms go extinct at a rate not seen since the dinosaurs went extinct. That's how quickly we're starting to lose species on Earth. The extinction, that's just the death of every member of a species. And this may be caused by things such as habitat destruction, burning down forests, clearing them for wood. Overfishing, that's another big one that we haven't even really gotten into. Our oceans are being overfished. We're getting too many fish out of our oceans, and they're not able to replenish those populations. So we're seeing our fish populations start to collapse. We're seeing our, all of the seafood populations that we're concerned about, and some of us like to eat. We're seeing those populations go down. Overhunting is another thing. That's why it's important to have lots of regulations on, fishing and hunting in some areas where it can be overdone. In our area, we have lots of deer and lots of fish, so we normally don't have to worry about that. But we're talking mostly about maybe in the ocean with overfishing. It's being harmed by people overfishing it. So we're seeing a number of species, an increasing number of species becoming endangered or going extinct. We're looking at maybe 20% of plant and animal species going extinct in the next 50 years. 20% of all plant and animal species on Earth. That is a fifth of life on Earth going extinct. That is really crazy to think about and really sad, but that's the rate that we're going. That is the future that we're looking at if things don't change. Living species have not been lost at such a high rate since the mass extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. The mass extinction that is currently underway is unique because humans are its primary cause. Now, there have been like 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history. We know this by looking back at our fossil record. For example, the dinosaurs, that was the last big mass extinction. We go down and we see all of these dinosaur fossils. We have evidence of an asteroid impact. That was a mass extinction. But there were mass extinctions before that, hundreds of millions of years ago. There are mass extinctions where supervolcanoes have gone off, and the climate has changed due to that. And we've wiped out ocean life. So there are actually, several mass extinctions that have happened, but this one is unique because one species is the primary cause, and it's us. This is the first time on Earth that it appears a species is causing a mass extinction. So, we have responsibility for that, and we also have responsibility for changing that. Not only, we're the ones causing it, but we're also the ones that can change it. And that's really what I want you guys to think about, and why this environmental issue chapter is so important, because it affects all life on Earth, not just us. Every species on Earth this impacts, and we have the power to change the way things are going. One last vocab term I wanted to go over with you. in this section was that of a keystone species. This is a species that may affect many other species in a community. For example, this picture of an otter here, an otter is a keystone species in many types of lakes and in the ocean. Um, these guys, they eat these sea urchins that are being shown there. They look like those little spiky things he's eating. If they didn't eat those sea urchins, then those sea urchins would take over, the kind of the bottom of these areas in the ocean, and they wouldn't leave much room for anything else. So let's say that something happens and all the otters are taken out, the sea urchins take over everything, and you're left with pretty much nothing but sea urchins in this area because nothing else can compete with them. So we would consider the otter to be a keystone species because it helps keep everything in check and it impacts many other species in an area. So those are the species that we usually are interested in first when we're talking about improving an environment or saving an environment. We look at the ones that are going to impact the most species. Those are the ones we're most concerned about. We have concerns about every species, but keystone species, those are the ones we are concerned about the most.